In the heart of New York City, where the lights never dim and the streets seldom sleep, a shadow moved with sinister intent. The year was 2017, and the city was about to become the hunting ground for a chameleon-like predator. It began on a stormy night at the Clinton Correctional Facility, where the most notorious inmates were kept under lock and key. Among them was Julian Marks, a serial killer whose intellect was as twisted as his crimes. With a mind sharper than the shivs hidden under the prison bunks, Julian orchestrated an escape that would leave the authorities baffled for years. As the thunder roared, Julian slipped out of his cell, a master of disguise, altering his appearance with materials he had collected over the months. By the time the guards realized he was gone, Julian had already merged with the sea of faces in the city. Julian's hunger to kill was insatiable. He didn't just change his appearance, he assumed entirely new identities, slipping into roles as easily as one would change clothes. One day he was a charming bartender in Manhattan, the next, a reclusive artist in Brooklyn. With each new face, the trail of bodies grew, and the city's underbelly whispered tales of the ghost killer who was everywhere and nowhere. Detective Lila Hart was assigned to the case, a woman whose past was as haunted as the killer she was chasing. She knew Julian's patterns, his penchant for theatrics, and his narcissistic need to be pursued. Lila was determined to end his spree, but with every step closer, Julian seemed 2 steps ahead, leaving behind a macabre signature that mocked the very law he defied. As the autumn leaves began to fall, covering the city in hues of fire and gold, the game of cat and mouse intensified. Julian's latest persona was perhaps his most daring, a charismatic politician rising in the ranks, his sights set on the very heart of the city's power. But Lila was closing in, her resolve hardened by the faces of the victims who haunted her dreams. She knew that to catch a chameleon, she had to become one herself. The story of Julian Marks, the ghost killer of New York, was far from over. His next move would be his boldest yet, and Detective Hart would be there, waiting to bring the final act to a close. The politician's masked Julian Marks, now known as Jonathan Mayfield, stood at the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd of New Yorkers gathered before him. They hung on his every word, unaware that the man they cheered for was the very monster the city feared. Julian relished this irony, the thrill of hiding in plain sight. Detective Lila Hart watched from the back, her gaze never wavering from Mayfield. She had seen through his latest disguise, recognizing the subtle, familiar patterns only Julian would display. Lila knew this was her chance to catch him, but she had to tread carefully. One wrong move could send Julian vanishing into the city's labyrinth once again. The fundraiser was in full swing, the elite of New York mingling, glasses clinking in the opulent hall. Julian, as Mayfield, moved among them, a predator in a sea of prey. He had chosen his next victim, a wealthy socialite whose disappearance would surely send ripples through the high society. But as he prepared to execute his plan, a flicker of recognition in someone's eyes gave him pause. Had his cover been blown? Julian excused himself, slipping away to the private gardens, the socialite following like a moth to a flame. Lila, sensing the shift, excused herself from the conversation with a city councilman and followed the trail. In the gardens, the sound of the city faded into a hushed whisper, and the game of hunter and hunted reached its crescendo. Under the cover of darkness, Lila confronted Julian. "It's over, Mayfield," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Julian turned, his smile cold as the steel of the knife he held. "Is it, Detective? Or is this just where the fun begins?" They circled each other, 2 forces of will clashing in the silence of the night. It was a dance they had performed many times, yet this time, Lila had an ace up her sleeve, a wiretap that was broadcasting Julian's confession to the entire NYPD. As sirens began to wail in the distance, Julian realized the trap he had walked into. With a snarl, he lunged at Lila, but she was ready. The struggle was brief, and as backup arrived, Julian Marks, the ghost killer of New York, was finally in cuffs. The city breathed a sigh of relief as the news of Julian's capture spread. Detective Lila Hart became a hero, her name synonymous with justice. But as she looked out over the skyline, she knew that the darkness she fought was never truly gone. It merely changed faces, waiting for the next Julian Marks to emerge. As Julian Marks sat in the interrogation room, his eyes were not those of a defeated man, but rather of one who saw this as yet another scene in his grand performance. Detective Lila Hart watched him through the one-way mirror, her thoughts a whirlwind of relief and unease. Julian was contained, but the story was far from over. News of Julian's capture had spread like wildfire, gripping the city in a mix of triumph and terror. But amidst the headlines, a series of gruesome murders began to surface, mirroring Julian's modus operandi with chilling precision. The city was forced to confront a new nightmare, a copycat killer inspired by Julian's legacy. Lila knew that to understand this new predator, she needed insights only Julian could provide. Reluctantly, she entered the room, the air thick with the tension of their shared history. "Julian, we have a problem," Lila began, her voice betraying none of her concern. A slow, unsettling smile crept across Julian's face. "Detective, problems are just opportunities in disguise, wouldn't you agree?" The interview was a psychological chess match. Julian, ever the showman, reveled in the attention, providing cryptic clues wrapped in riddles. Lila, however, was patient, deciphering his words, piecing together the puzzle of the copycat's identity. As the pieces fell into place, Lila realized the copycat was closer than they had thought. The killer was someone within the investigation, someone who had studied Julian's case files, someone who had access to all the details of his crimes. The revelation sent shockwaves through the department. Trust was shattered, and suspicion cast a shadow over every badge. But Lila was resolute, her instincts honed from years on the force guiding her to the truth. In a dramatic turn of events, the copycat was revealed to be none other than a young detective, whose admiration for Julian's cunning had twisted into a dark obsession. The department reeled from the betrayal, and Lila felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. With the copycat behind bars, the city found peace once more. Julian's trial was a media circus, but justice was served, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Detective Lila Hart stood outside the courthouse, the city's skyline reflecting the early morning light. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the cost had been high. As she walked away, her silhouette merged with the dawn, a symbol of hope in a city that never sleeps. And so, the story of Julian Marks, the ghost killer, came to an end. But in the heart of New York, where every shadow holds a secret, the tale of Lila Hart was just beginning. As the city of New York awoke to the news of the copycat's capture, Detective Lila Hart found herself at the center of acclaim and scrutiny. The media hailed her as the guardian of justice, yet the darkness within the city's heart remained, an abyss that seemed to gaze back into her soul. The shadow network. In the aftermath of the trials, a series of encrypted messages began to surface on the dark web. They spoke of a network, a collective of individuals who had been following Julian's case with vested interest. This shadow network was not just a group of idle spectators, they were orchestrators, seeking to turn the city into a grand stage for their twisted performances. Lila, with her relentless pursuit of truth, stumbled upon this network. It was a discovery that would lead her down the rabbit hole of the city's most guarded secrets. The network was elusive, their motives shrouded in mystery, but one thing was clear: they had been waiting for someone like Lila to enter the game. The invitation. One evening, as Lila pored over case files in her dimly lit office, an anonymous email arrived. It was an invitation, a challenge designed specifically for her. The network wanted Lila to join them, to become a part of their grand design. They promised her answers, the ultimate truth behind the city's facade of lights and shadows. Lila's instincts screamed caution, but the detective in her hungered for the knowledge that lay just beyond her reach. She accepted the invitation, setting in motion a series of events that would forever change the landscape of New York's criminal underworld. The first meeting. The meeting was set in an abandoned subway station, a relic from a bygone era. As Lila descended into the depths, the sounds of the city faded, replaced by the echoes of her own footsteps. She was greeted by masked figures, each a representative of the network's diverse membership. They spoke of their vision for New York, a city where chaos and order danced in a delicate balance. They revealed that Julian Marks was but a pawn, a catalyst for the greater game they played. Lila listened, her mind racing to piece together the puzzle. The revelation: the network's plan was audacious. They sought to control the city not through fear or violence, but through influence and manipulation. They had agents in every corner of society, from the halls of power to the darkest alleys. And now, they wanted Lila to be their newest agent. Lila was torn. Joining the network could grant her the power to protect the city in ways she never imagined, but at what cost? Could she trust this enigmatic collective, or was she merely stepping into another trap? The decision. As Lila emerged from the meeting, the first light of dawn was breaking over the skyline. She had a decision to make, one that would define her path as a protector of New York. Would she work with the Shadow Network, or would she fight them? The story of Detective Lila Hart continues, her journey into the heart of darkness just beginning. The city watches, its breath held in anticipation. As its fate hangs in the balance, the city of New York was a living organism, its streets the veins through which lifeblood flowed day and night. Detective Lila Hart stood at the precipice of a decision that could alter the very heartbeat of this metropolis. The Shadow Network's offer was a siren's call, tempting yet fraught with unknown peril. The dilemma: Lila's mind was a battleground, torn between her sworn duty to uphold the law and the tantalizing promise of unfettered access to the city's hidden sinews of power. The network had resources, connections, and knowledge that far exceeded anything available to the NYPD. They were offering her the keys to the kingdom, but at what price? As she walked the rain-slicked streets, Lila's thoughts were interrupted by a series of urgent messages on her phone. A new crisis was unfolding, one that demanded her immediate attention and threatened to sway her decision. The outbreak: a deadly virus had emerged in the city, its origins a mystery, its spread rapid and merciless. The hospitals were overwhelmed, and panic was beginning to take hold of the populace. The Shadow Network claimed they had information about the virus's origin, and they hinted at a cure, but only if Lila agreed to their terms. The detective found herself at the center of a maelstrom, the weight of countless lives pressing down upon her. Could she leverage the network's resources to save the city she loved, or would doing so entangle her in a web from which there was no escape? The choice: Lila made her choice. She would work with the network, but on her terms. She demanded transparency, a voice in their decisions, and the freedom to walk away if their actions conflicted with her moral compass. To her surprise, the network agreed, and Lila was inducted into their inner circle. The revelation: with the network's aid, Lila uncovered the truth behind the virus. It was not a natural occurrence but a bioengineered weapon, the result of a feud between rival factions within the network itself. The city was a chessboard, and its citizens pawns in a game of power and retribution. Lila's resolve hardened. She would use the network to end this threat, then dismantle it from within. The city needed a guardian, not puppet masters pulling strings from the shadows. The cure: working tirelessly, Lila coordinated with the network's scientists, law enforcement, and medical professionals. Together, they developed a cure and distributed it throughout the city, halting the virus's deadly march. The crisis had passed, but the battle for the soul of New York was just beginning. Lila had seen the darkness that lurked behind the facade of power, and she knew that her fight against it was far from over. The future: as the city recovered, Lila's role within the network evolved. She became a symbol of hope and a force for change, using her newfound influence to steer the network towards a path of benevolence. But the road ahead was long, and the network's tentacles were deep-rooted. The story of Detective Lila Hart and the Shadow Network continues, a tale of intrigue, power, and the quest for justice in the city that never sleeps. The city of New York had become a crucible of change, with Detective Lila Hart at its core. The Shadow Network, once a hidden force of manipulation, was now a beacon of hope under her guidance. But the peace was fragile, and the eyes of the underworld were ever watchful. The new dawn. Lila's influence within the network had grown, but so had the list of enemies who sought to return to the old ways of chaos and fear. Whispers of dissent began to echo through the network's ranks, and Lila knew that a storm was brewing on the horizon. As she navigated the complex web of alliances and rivalries, a message arrived that would test her resolve. A new player had entered the game, one who claimed to hold the key to the city's future, a mysterious figure known only as the Architect. The Architect's Gambit. The Architect was a master planner, a visionary who saw New York as a canvas for something grander than anyone had ever imagined. They reached out to Lila with a proposal to join forces and create a utopia within the city, a place where order and freedom coexisted. Lila was intrigued but cautious. She agreed to meet the Architect, setting the stage for a confrontation that would reveal the true nature of this enigmatic entity. The meeting. They met atop the One World Trade Center, the city sprawling below them like a vast, living organism. The Architect was charismatic, their words painting a picture of a New York reborn, free from crime and corruption. But Lila saw through the facade. She challenged the Architect, demanding proof of their intentions. In response, the Architect unveiled their grand design, a network of safe zones throughout the city, havens from the chaos of the outside world. The test to prove their sincerity, the Architect offered to neutralize a notorious gang that had been terrorizing the Lower East Side. Lila agreed to the test, watching as the Architect's plan unfolded with precision and efficiency. The gang was dismantled, and the safe zone established. It was a victory for the city, but Lila remained wary. She knew that power could corrupt, and she vowed to keep the Architect in check. The balanced CEA's days turned into weeks. The safe zones proved to be a success. Crime rates plummeted, and the citizens embraced the new order. But the balance was delicate, and Lila knew that it would take constant vigilance to maintain it. She worked tirelessly, her dedication to the city unwavering. But in the back of her mind, a question lingered: was she shaping the future of New York, or was she merely a pawn in the Architect's grand vision? The future unfolds. The story of Detective Lila Hart, the Architect, and the Shadow Network continues to weave through the fabric of New York. Each day brings new challenges, new alliances, and new threats to the delicate balance they have achieved. As the city evolves, so too does the narrative, a never-ending saga of power, ambition, and the quest for a better tomorrow. The narrative of New York's transformation under the watchful eyes of Detective Lila Hart and the enigmatic Architect continued to unfold. The city, once a battleground for power struggles, was now a testament to the possibility of change. But the peace was tenuous, and the shadows of the past loomed large. The Architect's vision for New York was grandiose, a utopia carved out of the chaos of urban life. The safe zones had become oases of tranquility, but the rest of the city still wrestled with the complexities of crime and poverty. The Architect believed that the answer lay in technology, in the creation of a smart city that could anticipate and neutralize threats before they emerged. Lila, now an influential figure within the network, was skeptical. She valued human judgment, the intuition of officers on the ground. She feared that reliance on technology could lead to a new form of tyranny, one where freedom was sacrificed at the altar of safety. The dissent. As the network implemented the Architect's plans, a group of dissenters rose from within. They were former allies of Lila, individuals who shared her concerns about the direction the city was taking. They came to her in secret, seeking to form an alliance to steer the network back to its original purpose, serving the people, not controlling them. Lila was torn. She had worked hard to transform the network into a force for good, but she could not ignore the valid fears of her comrades. She agreed to meet with them, to discuss a course of action that would balance progress with humanity. The undercurrent. The meeting took place in an old library, a relic from a time when knowledge was sought in books rather than bites. The dissenters laid out their plan, a series of targeted actions that would disrupt the architect's smart city infrastructure, demonstrating the dangers of over-reliance on technology. Lila listened, her mind racing with the implications of their proposal. It was a risky move, one that could plunge the city back into chaos if not executed perfectly. But it was also a chance to show that the heart of New York lay in its people, not in the cold calculations of machines. The operation was set in motion. Lila and her allies worked from the shadows, using their skills and knowledge of the network to outmaneuver the architect's surveillance. They struck at the heart of the smart city, causing a cascade of failures that brought the system to its knees. The city held its breath as the lights flickered and screens went dark. But the chaos was short-lived. Lila's team had prepared for this moment, deploying emergency protocols that kept the city running and demonstrated the resilience of human ingenuity. The aftermath: the architect was furious, but the message was clear: the city would not be ruled by technology alone. The network convened, and a new agreement was reached. Technology would be a tool, not a master, and the people would have a say in the future they wanted to build. Lila had proven her point, but she knew that the struggle for the soul of New York was far from over. The city was a tapestry of dreams and fears, and its story was still being written. The continuity on as the sun set over the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets. Lila Hart stood at her office window, looking out over the city she had sworn to protect. She had faced down the darkness, both within and without, and emerged stronger. But the tale of New York is never ending, a story of endless possibilities and challenges yet to come. Lila's journey continues, a beacon of hope in a world that is forever changing. As the twilight embraced New York City, Detective Lila Hart stood alone, the weight of her decisions and actions heavy on her shoulders. The city around her buzzed with life, unaware of the battles fought in the shadows to keep it safe. The Shadow Network had been reshaped, its purpose realigned with the heartbeat of the city thanks to Lila's unwavering resolve. The architect, once a figure of mystery and ambition, had come to respect the detective's vision of a future built on the foundation of humanity rather than cold technology. Lila had proven that even in a world teeming with uncertainty and hidden dangers, the strength of the human spirit could prevail. She had stood against the tide of darkness, not with weapons or fear, but with courage and hope. The story of Lila Hart would be etched into the annals of New York's history, a tale of a guardian who walked the thin line between light and shadow. Her legacy would inspire others to rise, to take up the mantle when the city called out for a hero. As she walked away from the window, Lila knew that her journey was not at an end, but rather a beginning. New York was a city of endless stories, and hers was but one among many.